This is Brien, screenfiles.com and review. What I'm looking at today is 2005's Isolation, directed by Billy O'Brien. And if you've seen as many horror movies as I have, you come to recognize where good ones typically come from. For instance, if something comes from Screen Gems, which is a division of Sony Pictures, it's going to be at best passable. It will have entertainment value to be sure, but nothing to write home about. Conversely, if you see anything from, let's say, A24, which is the home to directors like Ari Aster, then you are more than likely going to see something really interesting. It might not be your cup of tea, but it will be well produced, it will be gorgeous, and it will be somewhat complex in nature. And so, oftentimes when I'm trying to determine what to watch, who made it, as in the studio, as well as the director and so on, plays as much of a role as anything else. And so, Isolation comes from the Irish Film Board. And by my reckoning, they do really, really well. As I said, in the case of A24, not all their movies may be to your liking, but they tend to be very well produced, very interesting, varied in subject matter, and just really good horror films. And Isolation, though problematic, is no exception. Isolation revolves around a farmer who is being paid to inject his cows with this chemical, which is supposedly making them more fertile. Though it has a side effect, a deadly one, that no one anticipated. As I said, it's a good movie. And being from the Irish Film Board, it looks great. This is a movie that has some of the best production value I've seen in ages. And by production value, I'm referring to things like physical locations, props that are around them. Even a can of soda is a production object and potentially brings value to a movie. And in the case of Isolation, it's set on a farm. And the thing is, it's an actual farm. I have not spent any time on one, but this feels real to me. We're not talking about anything green screened in or anything like that. They're actually there. And it gives the production a sort of heft that no amount of money can buy, frankly. And that's really good. Though the problem with Isolation is not the production value, which, as I said, is great. It's not the actors. Ruth Negga and Sean Harris are in this movie. And it's an early movie for both actors, and both of them are excellent. It's the fact that the director is kind of caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. I mentioned earlier that Isolation revolves around a farmer who's giving his cows this chemical which causes something very deadly to happen. This would, in an American movie, be some kind of bizarre, huge puppet, a cow monster, if you will. And it would look incredibly stupid and be something that you'd find like in a Roger Corman movie. It doesn't want to look silly, which makes sense, who does? But at the same time, it's not willing to take a risk with this creature's design. In fact, it's not really willing to show it at all. You see it at moments, but I get the feeling that the producers well knew that they didn't have something created that would stand the eye test, so they barely showed it. It's a pity, and as I said, I understand why they did it. This movie could have been dumb in terms of its creature. They didn't go that route. They went a much more cautious and careful route. But the movie suffers for that in a similar way that it would have suffered if the creature were some ridiculous cow monster or something. Though I mentioned two of the actors in Isolation already, and they help elevate this movie. This is a very good movie despite its shortcomings. And you might think that the plot of isolation is ridiculous. Namely, the idea that scientists are experimenting with means to make cows more fertile that backfire. But keep in mind, have you heard of recombinant bovine somatotropin? I mention it because it's given to many cows in America. What recombinant bovine somatotropin does is that, I should say what it's supposed to do, because I'm not a chemist. I have no idea beyond what I read about this stuff. Though what it's supposed to do is increase the amount of milk that cows are able to give. Now, this causes some health problems with the cow, which is a problem, though it brings a few questions. The most important being, was there ever a milk shortage? Why do we need this? Why must we, as consumers, literally participate in a science experiment done without most people's knowledge and most people seemingly not caring? It's the same thing with GMOs, which are known as genetically modified organisms, which are foods that you commonly eat, I would assume. Things like corn. Most corn sold in the United States is genetically modified. Tomatoes. As a rule of thumb, if it doesn't say organic or non-GMO, it is GMO. And according to the government, they say that these things are harmless. And maybe they are. Though, like in the movie Isolation, you have to ask yourself, why are we doing this? Is there a point to this? And could this potentially have problems down the road? As I said earlier, you, me, everyone in this country is part of a huge experiment as far as our food sources are concerned. And isolation plays on those fears and describes an outcome which is horrific. I'm not saying recombinant bovine somatotropin and the genetic engineering of food are the same things as what this movie is talking about. I'm not. Though this movie, especially for anyone that follows this stuff, can be seen as a bit of a warning, maybe a bit of a time to stop and question, why are we doing these things? And could it have potentially disastrous outcomes further down the road? No one knows for certain, though in the United States we're all part of a massive experiment, all part of our own isolation, if you will. This is Brien with ScreenFiles.com in review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow.